Welcome to the Gig Boss Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Meckler. Today we've got Katie Ernst on the show. Katie's an award-winning bassist, vocalist, and composer based in Chicago. Her album Little Words premiered at the Kennedy Center in Washington and was based on the poetry of Dorothy Parker. Her work has garnered critical praise from the Chicago Tribune, Jazziz magazine, and others. Her band Twin Talk blends genres, living at once in the worlds of improvised music, indie rock, and the avant-garde. I don't know how, I came up with that. I don't know if that's how you describe it.
Love that.
She's performed at the Kennedy Center and Chicago Symphony Center with renowned pianist and composer Jason Moran. She's a top call bassist on the Chicago scene. Please welcome to the podcast, Katie Ernst.
Woo-woo. Hello, Adam. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, totally. I'm glad you could do this. We've done it. We've connected. So my earliest memory of you is Birch Creek Fine Arts Camp, right? Like I was a counselor there, and you were like a high schooler. Yes. And at the same camp was like Brian Carter on drums and Adam Larson and Gabe Med. I think Carl Kennedy was there, who's on the scene in Chicago now.
Yep.
So it's like a really cool group of musicians to be around and coming up with in high school. Do you keep in touch with any of them? Do you work with them anymore?
I saw Carl the other week here in Chicago, and yeah, it's kind of a veritable who's who of high school jazz talent that's all grown up.
Everybody's crushing it.
I actually still go to Birch Creek every year because I teach there now. So
yeah, right. I was going to say, I saw that you're on the faculty there now. That's super cool. And you went to Eastman, right? That's like a lot of Eastman faculty.
Yeah, so I met Jeff Campbell, who was my great bass mentor in high school when I'd go to this summer program. I just was like trying to follow him wherever he was going. So he said, I teach at the Eastman School of Music. And I said, great, I'd love to follow you there. So
that's awesome.
That summer high school camp was really important for my trajectory, which is great.
Yeah, right.
And you were a great counselor. You really counseled us all beautifully.
Yeah,
yes.
I was just hanging around. I was just absorbing the same knowledge you were all absorbing, attending the master classes. And
you made sure we got to bed on time.
I was telling little jazz stories for bedtime stories to the students.
It was beautiful. Yeah, and Dizzy Gillespie said, good night, all. To all a good night. Yeah.
That's right. Just like the Christmas story. Cool. Well, hey, I've been listening to your music a lot over the last couple of weeks just to kind of get ready for talking with you. And Little Words, I had listened to Little Words a little bit, I think, when it came out. And I guess I didn't really realize it was based on poetry by Dorothy Parker. Like I didn't really understand the background of it. And since then, I've started to read a bunch of her poems, and I love her stuff. It's super cool. It's like cheeky and sort of dark at times. It's more, it's like we read a lot of Shel Silverstein at my house because we've got the kids,
Yeah.
And in some ways, like the prose remind me a bit of Shel Silverstein, who I think was also somebody who existed in like the 30s, 40s, 50s, maybe in terms of writing. It was so fascinating for me to read her work. Obviously, her work is like a lot more adult. The Shel Silverstein stuff is a joke, but she still has that like you're leading up to a punchline kind of feeling to a lot of her poems.
Yeah, there's always a twist.
Right, right. So what was your why choose Dorothy Parker's work? Were you reading her work early in your life? Was she influential on you in that way? And like, how did those songs kind of come together?
Yeah. Well, I've told this story before, and I'm still like mildly ashamed of how not cool of a story it is. But so I'd love to say that I'm a great avid reader of Dorothy Parker's poetry, and I decided that I would set her music in great reverence to her art form and blah blah blah. But I had written a song for jazz composition class at Eastman, and it was supposed to be in the style of Wayne Shorter, and I was getting like okay grades on my compositions that were in the style of other musicians. But this was the one I crushed. I got a B+ on it. I felt really good about it. And I thought that it would be it just felt like a very lyrical song. And I was like, oh, in another life, I would have words for this song and I would sing this song. And I hadn't really been writing very much like formal music or anything. So it was just like, it would be so cool. So I Googled short poems and like just clicked through poetry.net or whatever and just did this horrible, just like, nope, that doesn't work. And I don't know what I was even looking for, but I did find this poem, Anecdote by Dorothy Parker, that just has a nice kind of lilting rhyme scheme, and it just fit this melody that I had written. And I was like, oh, sick. Found my lyrics.
Found one, got it.
And then I went back and I was like, who is this poet that wrote this great little quippy poem about heartbreak? And I was like, oh, she's genius. And if anyone's looking for a really good like breakup kind of like woe is me, but also I'm still strong, like Dorothy Parker is your lady. I think she kind of championed that tongue-in-cheek kind of like you said, quippy, strong, kind of jabby but clever poem style that I loved. But I also was like, I feel like you can see her vulnerability in there too, and that's what I kind of keyed into for this record. That it's called Little Words. Is it just kind of both? Like she both seems very strong, but also very sensitive and vulnerable and all that good stuff. So that's how I Googled short poems and I stumbled upon her, and now I'm a great champion of her literary contributions.
That's great. So why you did that one song, and then you decided this is great, I want to do more, and that's how the record came about?
Yeah, well, I did that one song, and I had written another song, and I used those two songs to apply for the Betty Carter Jazz Ahead program.
Right.
Right after I graduated from college, and I got great encouragement to continue from the mentors there, because I had this feeling that like I didn't write big band charts or arrangements of things, and I felt like there was a different category of composer that I didn't fit into.
Sure.
But then these super cool people were like, no, if you hear a song, write a song, do your thing. And so then I was like, well, there's some other poems I like. And I turned that into an album for my big gig at the Kennedy Center for the Kennedy Senator.
Senator. Kennedy Center.
So it unfolded into a much bigger project than I had imagined at the beginning.
Did you once you decided you were going to continue using her poetry, were you writing music first and finding poems that fit to the music, or did you eventually go the other way where you were like, here's a poem that I like and now I'm going to write music to it? Some of them feel flowy in that way, like you use the lyrics first.
Yeah. No, the first song was the only one that was music first, and then just kind of it magically fit. But then I sat with a poem, and I would have my bass with me and just kind of try to figure out what that poem's character and rhythm and kind of the inherent built-in structures of it and how it could fit into a song.
Yeah.
There's also one song that's kind of rockin' called But Not Forgotten, where I borrowed this sample that Dustin Laurenzi made, and he had sampled it from a Ligeti piece or something. Anyway, it just had like this cool vibe, and so I said, can I borrow that? And so we co-wrote that one. But
cool.
But most of them were just sitting with the poetry book open and trying to find the melody that was in there.
Nice. So you play bass and you sing at the same time.
Yes.
Do you feel like you were a vocalist first, a bassist first? Did it take you time to decide that you're both of those things? Was there a process? In the jazz community, there's a lot of like vocalist kind of attitudes. And so like, have you run up against any of that? Did you feel like you were one or the other, or like how have you identified kind of like through your development?
Well, I always sang for fun. Just for fun. There was this green light moment where I was taking piano lessons in first or second grade, and my piano teacher told my mother that I had a pleasant singing voice or something. Like, how you have to they're like, sing the song, and then so I think I don't think it was even like that much of a compliment. It was just like, oh, that she's hitting the pitches or something.
Sure.
But that was enough for me to feel like, okay, like that, I don't have a complex about it. Like I can sing a song.
Yeah.
And then I started playing bass when I was 9. So they kind of were going hand in hand. But I didn't really combine the two probably until Birch Creek, my first time that I was there. I was probably 14. And they asked if someone could sing. And I was like, I've sung a song, you know? And I sang Skylark, and it was really breathy. And someone told me to just not use a lot of vibrato, and it would sound like jazz. So I did that. And it's great advice. And then I started putting the two together. But then I guess when I went to college, I wanted to be a serious student of the bass. Yeah. And I did it, I think because of that baggage of how I saw people talk about singers differently. Or that it wasn't as, I don't know. Yeah, there was just like a different feeling to when people were talking about singers or like, oh, and they sing. And I also think people gravitate towards singing. So it's like if given the opportunity, people are going to connect more with my singing because there's words and they could see my face and telling the stories and stuff. Yep. And I was like, but I want to be a bass. Like I did make kind of a strong, but I'm a bass player. And I didn't sing like in college, like in the school setting. I had this outside life where I was playing tunes and singing at the Strathallan Hotel and at some other places around town. But now I feel very, like, I think I get a lot of calls because I do both things. Yep. The music that I write usually involves both. Sometimes I get called to do one or the other. But it's almost, I feel like it's like how you would play flugel or trumpet. Or, you know what I mean? Like, there's not this pressure to declare. Right.
Like,
to be able to
especially now that you're like an artist. I mean, you're an artist. You're out there doing your own thing. As a student, I think we're oftentimes railroaded into a certain area, and maybe this is a problem with conservatory style education. Is that like that real uniqueness of the individual isn't so much championed as like, and maybe this is necessary as like you have to learn the language. You know what I mean? It's like got to learn the language first, and then you could be yourself. I don't know. Like I know some people that transferred out of Lawrence, where I went to school, because they felt stifled in their own sort of creativity and the way that they approach music. And now, one of those people is now in LA. He's a very successful composer, trumpeter. Yeah. So that to me, that's an interesting kind of aspect.
It's tricky. I've had thoughts about this because I sometimes pivot where I'm like, it could be like, oh, we need to nurture each individual with what they're interested in. But I also feel like there's a certain amount of just like, you have to learn how to commit to something. Like, I feel like as a young person, I could have been like, well, I don't have time to really focus on my classical bass because I'm trying to do this other thing. I think there's this really dangerous territory where you can use a very valid reason to not work hard at things that are hard.
Sure.
But you know what I mean? Like, and I feel like as an 18-year-old, I didn't know what direction I was going to be in. It's kind of a time to just like eat everything.
Right.
and
absorb.
And I don't think I waited to, like I said, I sang in other like I was still pursuing that part of myself.
Yeah.
But, and maybe that just worked for me because that I had both outlets and it was cool. But in some ways I feel like who we are as art people is going to come out in any context, kind of no matter what. Like if you let it. So it's tricky because I also think there's like, there's a line to that. Like I think Eastman is just starting a vocal jazz program soon.
Oh wow!
So, which is cool. I'm excited for them. I think that'll be fun. But that wasn't there when I was there, and so I just chose a different path. But I'm still singing. So I think, I don't know. That's something I have thought about. Where it's like, is it the institution or like it's kind of both? I don't know.
Yeah, totally. So you said you started at 9. Did you start on electric then, since you were young?
I started on the upright bass. It was a little quarter size one, and I thought I would grow taller than it, and they kept giving me bigger ones.
Yeah, that's right. That's cool. That's really interesting. So you did classical bass then right away? Was it just like early fundamental classical stuff? When did you start getting into improvised music?
I didn't take bass lessons outside of just like playing in orchestra and getting like the orchestra teacher's feedback. But I started taking private lessons in high school when I was starting to study jazz. So I studied with this guitarist and bass player who taught me about tunes and bass lines. I learned a lot at Birch Creek and would kind of bring things back. But I think my fundamentals were really built up in college.
Yeah.
And this incredible classical bass teacher, James Vandemark, I think was, I won't speak for him, but I'll project that he was probably mildly horrified that he had to deal with my like level of beginner, because I was a jazz bass major and I just couldn't.
Yeah.
I couldn't play the bass in the way that his other students were playing it. But he got me up to speed, so I'm really grateful for that. But see, that's where I could say, like, my younger self would have been like, I don't even care about classical bass. Why do I got to study it? But it also was, like, helpful. I don't know. You can kind of make anything good or bad, I think.
Totally. I had a similar experience, having to study some classical trumpet when really all I wanted to do was study jazz and improvised music, black music. I was really kind of, but when I dug into the classical stuff, and my teacher, I remember for one of my recitals, he was like, "You're better at classical music than you are at jazz music," And I was like, "No." But,
dear diary.
Yeah, but it was, it definitely helped with technique and command of the instrument in a way that maybe just purely studying jazz. I think there are some people that are trying to come up with ways of practicing jazz music that kind of mimic the classical approach. It's maybe a bit more regimented. That maybe then you can get the same physical benefit. Trumpet and bass too. I mean, they're such physical instruments. It's like if you're not practicing the technique and the fundamentals, at least on trumpet, it's like you got to do fundamentals every day, or you notice.
Yeah.
So when did you feel like you could freely express yourself on both bass and voice simultaneously, right? Because it seems to me like a sort of drummer slim independence kind of thing where a lot of your music, you're sometimes doubling your bass line, but a lot of times you're harmonizing or you're singing something contrapuntal compared to what you're playing. When did that become sort of like I can just do this now?
I think, it started by playing like walking bass lines and singing standards. And I did that a lot, just like little high school gigs and college gigs and things. And I think by just doing it a lot, I started to develop some of that independence. A lot of the singers that I admire do a lot of back phrasing, and so I would hear the vocals being set a little bit back in the time, and as a bass player, I'm playing in the time, and that's probably my coolest party trick. But
that seems like it would be so difficult to drive forward and lay back against it singing. I don't know, maybe not. Once you're doing it.
At first I was like, man, this is pretty cool. People think it's cool. But then I realized that like all good musicians are keeping track of the time and playing with it at the same, you know what I mean? Like when you're soloing, you're not just like ignoring the time and back phrasing. You are aware of it, and then you're, so it's like, I'm just articulating both, but it's just...
You're articulating both, right. Which is another level. I mean, that's a different...
I think it's easier, it's like tapping your foot or something,
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
No, it's amazing, and it rocks, and I think I kind of developed it by just doing it a lot in real time in front of people at little gigs and stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm curious how... to go back to the Dorothy Parker record, did you have to get permission, like for anybody that's thinking about using lyrics of a poet? Like, did you have to get permission from her estate? How did that work?
You do. You always have to get people's blessing on your use of their stuff, unless it's public domain. So I was nervous because I had already written the songs, I feel like I don't usually like check and make sure I can be creative with something before. So there's always a risk, but I looked up the Dorothy Parker. I'm like, again, Googling like who Dorothy Parker, she's way dead. Like who do I talk to?
Who do I talk to? Yeah.
And kind of a fascinating twist is that when Dorothy Parker died, she didn't have family or friend. Like, sad thing, her biggest fear was dying alone, and she indeed did. But she had a great life in between, here and there. But anyway, she left all of her stuff to Martin Luther King Jr., who she had never met, and he had never met her.
Wow.
But she was a great social justice advocate her whole life. She had a hard time connecting with people on a personal, individual level, but she really deeply cared about like the broader human existence and justice.
Yeah.
And she was anti-fascist before it was a thing,
Sure.
But so she left all of her stuff to Martin Luther King Jr. because she wanted to support his work. And she also had the kind of creepy foresight to say that in the event of his death, all of her stuff should go to the NAACP.
Wow.
Which is spooky because she died in the
67, right?
67.
Was it that? Or was it 63? I remember thinking like, wow.
Yeah. But she died in like not long. Yeah, there wasn't that much time that Martin Luther King had her stuff.
Right.
And so then I sent an email to the NAACP saying, hello, do you happen to have this like old dead lady's poetry? And how do you feel about this project? Sorry to bother you. Like,
yeah.
keep doing your thing. And they were super cool. It was very reasonable. And I got to just write a check to the NAACP to use her work instead of to someone's crummy grandson that was going to buy an Xbox or something.
Yeah.
So that was cool. And it was basically just like a non-exclusive license to use the poetry. And they have to have a line that says, I thank them for their authorization.
Right.
But yeah, kind of wild. So it would, I imagine, be much harder if it was just trying to get in contact with someone that wasn't very responsive. But
yeah, totally.
But yeah.
Yeah, that's super interesting. NAACP. And just having to deal with those kinds of rights things, I think especially as young musicians, that's a really tough landscape to navigate. And it's nice to hear your experience with that. Twin Talk. Let's talk a little bit about Twin Talk. Twin Talk. Na, 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 na. I've been listening to that like crazy. Me and the boys were listening to it this morning.
Cool.
And we're talking about all the different instruments in the music. Twin Talk is you. It's Andrew Green on drums. It's Dustin Laurenzi on saxophone. Sometimes he's overdubbing a little bit here and there. Maybe playing some bass clarinet. You recorded Weaver, the new one, in Justin Vernon's studio, right, in Eau Claire?
Yes, that's right.
I know that some of you have Wisconsin ties. We've been talking about Birch Creek. Dustin did some touring with Bon Iver. Was recording at Justin's studio just like this obvious choice? Was there some kind of vibe you were after with recording this album?
So Dustin toured with Bon Iver, and so they all hung out for a long time together. And there's this studio. I don't know I don't know who said what to who, but we had the opportunity to kind of just like in kind book some time at this great studio. So what it did was it helped us to think about how we might use a longer recording time in a way that felt useful instead of just like doing the classic 1 or 2 day intense recording session and then you just collapse at the end of it.
Yep.
So it let us kind of record more like a rock band or not even a rock band because they'll probably be in the studio longer, but just to have a little more time, not to just get 1,000 more takes of everything, but we did more layering. There's more, a little bit more kind of production side to Weaver than there is to some other of our albums.
Yeah.
And it was great. I mean, we stayed there, so it was just this immersive thing, and it's made me curious about, how we record certain music. Like, does it need to be all done in just like couple takes, then we're done.
Yep.
Or, like what happens if you take a little bit more time with it, or if you have a vision for getting, the bass, the B-A-S-E, the bass track, and then building up from it. So it was really cool. I was grateful for it.
Like using overdubs more than you would maybe traditionally playing improvised trio music?
Yeah, we ended up using the initial take where we're so Twin Talk's vibe is to really improvise with the structures of the songs. So things aren't as, there's a lot of composed material, but things can hinge open and pivot and go into different places or transition into other things. So there's a lot of openness to it where it's not like we're playing the same take to get the right one. It's like each one kind of has its own life. So we'd pick one of the ones that we liked of that vibe and then use that as this is the take. So what does it want or need, or can we enhance anything? So it was a cool process. I had not done that before, but you'll hear more layers of things and some extra vocals and horn layers that are on there. More percussion. Yeah. So that it lives, it's just like living in the recorded medium instead of trying to just do something that is only replicable in real life. Yeah.
So how many days was that then? How long did you block off to be out there?
That was 5 days.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's that's a chunk of time.
Yeah, it's funny for the jazz world, that's like an eternity. And for other musicians, that's like, okay, cool story. Yeah.
It's so true though. That is, that's rare to get that much time. But I think that comes across on the record, you can hear that some real time was spent after the bass tracks were recorded. You know what I mean? It's like you can kind of tell production wise, not that it sounds overly produced either. Like it sounds very organic in the way that you guys usually sound. And some of these songs I think I had heard you play before, so like listening to them on the record, I'm recognizing things, but then hearing extra layers or hearing certain effects. I think spending that extra time really does make a difference, and I really dig what came out of it.
Yeah, thanks. I'm proud of that one.
Yeah, the tune "Folks" on the record seems like this real epic masterpiece, right? Maybe one of these examples of like there was a bass track and then BASE track, and then it just grows and grows over the, and then it's like layering voices, layering horns. And the beginning of the song, actually, like I started listening to the beginning of the song and I thought, man, this has, I always hate it when people compare my music to other people's music, so I'm sorry that I'm going to do this. But I was like feeling some sort of like Happy Apple vibes. I spent a bunch of time listening to Happy Apple in the early 2000s. I know Andrew Green and I have bonded over that a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about how that particular song came together? Who wrote that one?
Folks was written by Dustin.
Okay.
And Dustin, of all of us, in terms of like composing, always has the most like finished science project. He always wins the award for most complete vision when he brings a song in. So yeah, the flow of that song kind of starts with like a real kind of sparse, kind of hitchy back beat in there, and by the end of it, it's kind of like the whole village is celebrating the coming of spring or something. I don't know. I made this all up,
sure.
But yeah. So kind of the general sections were created by Dustin, and then we make our individual parts from there. We'll figure out if and where vocals fit in, and yeah. It's been this band because it doesn't have a chordal instrument. We don't have guitar or piano or anything like that. Similar to the Happy Apple vibe, right?
Yeah.
It just allows for a lot. There's just a lot more space that you can have inherently, but then you have to figure out creative ways of also filling that space. Like I'll play more double stop notes or chords on the bass, or the voice and saxophone can kind of fill things out. And so by the end of that song, it's very filled out, especially because we were able to layer things. But even in real time, that's kind of the that's the goal. And yeah, Happy Apple's super cool.
Yeah, cool. I spent a little bit of time studying like the chordless quartet with Jerry Mulligan and Chet Baker, and they were very intentional about writing chord tones a lot in parts, or like having somebody cover chord tones. Are you thinking theoretically in that way, or is it a bit more organic in terms of how you're coming up with your parts? Are you just like, this is a cool contrapuntal line, this fills in the harmony, I don't really know what or how, but it sounds cool? Like on a scale of 1 to nerd, where are you guys at in terms of thinking about harmony?
I'm thinking through things here. I think Dustin and I both write pretty contrapuntally. Like the relationship between the bass and the melody is very considered, and then the harmony is just kind of filled in from there, right?
Yeah.
Like it can live on its own without any inner support. But then I'm thinking of some of the layers that we added in folks, just to pick one. Some of the oohs and ahs are just filling out the chord and helping support the harmony. So strong emphasis on contrapuntal relationships, but a deep reverent nod to harmonic clarity.
There you go. Perfectly said.
Thank you.
So it seems like you do a lot, like you seem to win a lot of awards. You're like traveling. You did a thing in Mexico City, right, in 2020, where you went down and did like an exchange. Is that true?
Right at the beginning of COVID-19's disaster.
Yeah.
I can't believe we did this. But it was, Twin Talk was on tour going from Chicago out east. And we were hitting we were in New York City, we were in Philly, we were in Baltimore, we were it was as the dominoes were starting to fall. Like we were starting, everybody was learning oh, there's a thing, it could be bad. Is it really bad? We don't know. It's fine. Wash your hands. Yep. There was no hand sanitizer. And we're on tour during this whole time.
Wow.
And at the end of this tour, I was going to fly from Philly to Mexico City to do this Chicago Ciudad de Mexico exchange for improvised musicians. It was super cool. I was excited to do it, but it was getting weird, and I wasn't sure if it was even going to happen. And then they said, it's happening. We're doing it. So I flew to Mexico City right at the beginning of the pandemic, and just was like, hey guys, I was on tour, so I won't give you a hug or anything. I'll just wave at you. We just didn't know what was happening.
Yeah.
But it happened, and we got back, do you remember the day that, everybody from Europe came back to O'Hare Airport? Maybe this is just a local story, but it was bad.
Yeah.
I came home the next day, so it was a ghost town. No one was at O'Hare. It was so spooky. Yeah.
So you almost got stuck in Mexico, maybe. I mean, when did they stop flying people? Yeah. Shortly after that, I would think.
Yeah, it was, in hindsight, insane. And I am not a risk taker, so it was just I guess if everyone else is doing it, I guess we're doing it. And it was awesome.
You don't know what you don't know until you know what you don't know.
So, so that was really cool. I think someday the musicians in Mexico are going to come up to Chicago and we'll complete the exchange.
Right.
But it was really cool.
What did you do? What kind of people were you working with? Students? Were they adults?
It was just all adult improvising professional musicians that basically it was the free improvised music scene in both worlds.
Cool.
Where they had representatives from both places, and so we would be put in different configurations, and we played a bunch of different shows around Mexico City, and it was super cool.
Yeah.
Ate some good food and met people, and it was great. It was really cool to hear kind of the vibe of a different city's improvised music scene. I think a little bit there's a more of not a metal, but there's more of a more rocking edge to the Mexico City improvisers.
Sure.
And that it was super fun and makes you play differently.
Yeah.
And it was super cool. Yeah.
Cool.
Doesn't matter. Anyways, it was great.
I spent some time down there with Todd Clauser, way back in the day, 2000, I don't know, 10, 11, 12, somewhere in there. And I just really loved it. I loved being in Mexico City, and I went to some jam sessions and met a bunch of people there. But most of the band is from some of the bands from Mexico City, some of the bands from Argentina. So I was like the only non-Spanish speaking person in the band. So it's like they were just speaking Spanish all the time, and I was riding around in the van for hours and hours,
just nodding along,
absorbing and listening to music, trying to figure it out. But yeah, what a beautiful country. I remember there. When I went down there, people were like, "Be careful, it's scary," or whatever. And I just felt like it was so beautiful, and the people were so beautiful. And I actually called Jana, and I was like, "We should move down here. It's so great," But I know pollution is high in, at that time, there were even some people wearing masks there at that time. This was like 2010, 2011, 2012, because of the pollution rates down there. I don't know if it's gotten better, but
every city has its joys and sorrows, but. Yeah,
no
it was
doubt
a cool
about
spot.
it.
Everyone should go.
No doubt about it. So are you, I think a lot about passive income, how musicians and artists are making it in today's economy. That's part of the reason for doing this podcast. Are you applying for grants a lot? Like, what's your approach to getting funding for creative projects? Do you think about monetizing your work in any way? Are you thinking about Spotify? Are you thinking about the sort of like the mainstream ways of trying to make money on your music? Are you licensing things? Are you doing anything in that realm? Or is it just, are you working on grants and things like that?
Well, so I live in Chicago, and there's a pretty cool ecosystem here for making music. And so I'll just give you a little summary of my life.
Yeah, be awesome.
I am the jazz ensemble director at Wheaton College. I've been doing that for about 8 years, which is wild.
Yeah, it's a long time.
So I'm the quirky jazz ensemble director there, and I am the director of music at a church in Winnetka. So I pick songs and go to a staff meeting and write music for the Sunday worship service, and it's super fun.
Cool.
And I play in other people's bands, and I write music and record music, and we'll do some more regional touring and things like that. But I have kind of found in Chicago a really just kind of abundant ecosystem, I guess, is the only thing I can think of calling it.
Yeah.
Where there's opportunities to play lots of different music and to be actively doing stuff without too much like considered hustle, I guess. I've also lived here for 10 years, so I think that might also be some of the ease that I'm talking about, is just having been part of a community for a while.
And so it takes time to get calls.
Yeah, or
that's sort of what you mean? To get connected.
To be to know people and be known, to establish yourself as a contributor to the community.
Yeah.
And I play at a weekly jam session with the drummer Ted Sirota over at the Hungry Brain, and that's been a great way of me being able to meet the younger musicians that are moving to town now, and staying kind of like present in the next the next scene that's coming up. But I guess I'm sure you've checked out my very active Instagram account and my very desolate YouTube channel. But I think at least for where I am and what I'm doing, there's a lot of things happening in my local space that the internet space is more of an afterthought for me.
Yeah. Cool.
And I, but I'm also not like anti anything. I think all of those things are good tools that can be used when you need them or want them.
Sure.
But yeah, I feel like I'm not a particularly savvy internet user, or like platform user.
Yeah.
But I am a really active, like community participant or something like that.
Yeah.
Which has been really fun for me. I think I have a nice setup over here.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, and it's good for listeners to hear about somebody that's not focused on building an internet presence, and that's focused on building a in-person presence, right? A community presence, because the internet presence doesn't always translate to an in-person presence. It's like I've talked to people who have millions and millions of streams on Spotify and can't sell tickets to a show, and so there's that element as well. And it's like you could also think of the internet like its own community, and you have your local community in Chicago. I certainly felt that way about being on the scene in Minneapolis for a decade, feeling like I'm a part of this thing, and we're in this together, and we're, like you're saying, each one of us is contributing to the scene in a different way, and there's a lot of lifting each other up. I felt that way, especially as McNally Smith College closed where I was working. It's like people really, other musicians, community members really rallied around the musicians in town. So I think it's a beautiful thing to be a part of a scene, to really be a part of a scene in real life, apart from the internets.
Yeah.
What's your balancing between freelancing and creative work? How much are you playing in other people's bands, and how much are you doing your own stuff in addition to the other teaching and work that you're doing?
I mean, Twin Talk has been rehearsing on Mondays.
Yeah, cool.
For a while now. We got a show coming up, so we're getting stuff ready for that. And I'm not sure what the percentages are, but I feel like the projects that I'm involved with now are the ones that I'm interested in and committed to, and sound fun for me. There's I think a certain clarity that you get from the great timeout that was the last 2 years.
Sure.
Where I maybe think about, just what seems like it is a good fit for my skill set, or what my whatever kind of would I be a good contributor to this project?
Sure.
And I'm super cool with passing it on if it's something that would be better suited for someone else.
Okay.
So I think that is probably one of my newfound activities, is being selective, or being, thoughtful about what I do, so that I'm doing things that are exciting and I'm a good fit for. I think that might be kind of. So I think I'm stumbling out of I think that all the projects that I'm involved in, I feel creatively invested in.
That's cool.
So whether my name is on it or someone else's name is on it, they're kind of in the same category. And because of my my adjunct position and my church job, there's enough the consistency that I can kind of hone in on a certain type of music making now, which is great.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of instrumentalists, maybe especially in the jazz world, it's like when we start out, it's just like, yes, just playing every single gig you can find. Mm-hmm. And I felt myself doing the same thing over 10 years, sort of like channeling my energy into projects that I really cared about, whether I was there as a side person or as the leader. It's like the majority of the projects that I did, especially late in my time in Minneapolis and now, are just my own things, or things that I'm invested in. So I think that's a really cool place to be at as an artist. And for young musicians that are starting out, it's like you can start to think about, how can I carve out my own things in this madness,
Yeah, and I'm because I feel like I am very much a product of somebody that has, I absolutely am the yes person I've done a boatload of different things, and I said yes to everything for a long time, and I'm thrilled at how that has informed my life. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in trying things so that you know whether or not they interest you. You know what I mean? Like I think I get very hesitant to encourage the like, just only do what you want to do too early or something, just out of like, how do you know?
Yeah, totally.
But at some point, and maybe this is like, you know, having the amount of space between being the fresh out of college, yes, absolutely. And now it's like at some point you should start noticing the things that don't sound fun. You know what I mean? Like there are certain things where it's like that, maybe that would be fun for someone, or that like sounds fancy, or it sounds like you should want to do it, but it doesn't sound fun to you. Then just notice that, you know, like, because it's hard. I think it's a hard thing to be able to put your finger on exactly what it is that you want to do, because the world is so big and nothing is what you plan for it to be, and all that, you know, like, but there's a lot of clarity in knowing what doesn't speak to you, you know, like, like if it's like, oh, I could go on tour for 3 months with this indie band, that should be fun, right? Like that's something that sounds like going on tour. We're going to be hitting the road. We're going to be but that might not sound very fun. Like that's not fun for me at this moment.
Sure. Yeah.
And that would put a wrench in a lot of other things where it's like, there's someone else for this. That's what would just make their heart sing.
Right.
And I don't need to know what I'd rather do, but it's helpful to know what doesn't sound fun, even though it's supposed to. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And you know, I get a lot of joy from getting a call and then being like, you know who you should call. Yeah. You know, it's like and passing the work to people that are still building their career in the scene. You know,
totally.
I get a lot of joy from that, and I think that's a cool thing about the music industry. That you can start to pass work to people and lift, you know, like I mentioned, lifting each other up. I think that's such a big part of the music industry. That's really cool. It could be the other way too, but I think there's a lot of people that are looking out for each other.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that Twin Talk's rehearsing every Monday. Just to wrap it up, like what do you have coming up? What are you working on? What can we expect to see in the future?
Well, I am going to be ducking away from society, which seems insane right now. But I am doing a composing residency at the Ragdale Foundation.
Cool.
And so I'm going to spend 18 days alone and creating new work.
That's awesome.
It's going to be great.
You applied for?
It's a residency you can apply for.
Oh, okay.
So I was granted access to this great opportunity.
Nice.
And a duo project I have called Wayfaring is getting resurrected in a week. Seattle clarinetist and improviser James Falzone is coming to Chicago. We started a band a couple years ago, and then he moved to be the director of Cornish College music program. And so he's coming into town. We're going to play at Constellation. That's going to be fun.
Cool.
We're going to make a record in the fall. I think Twin Talk's probably going to make a record in the next sometime soon-ish. We're kind of due for our next one.
Yep.
There's just I've been making a solo set that's going to get recorded. I've recorded a jazz standards record that'll come to life someday.
Cool.
So I've got, kind of a lot of things coming up and in the pipeline. So I'm ready to get back in it, which will be great.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to hear all that stuff. We'll link all your stuff in the show notes for people listening. Thanks so much for talking to me.
Thanks, Adam.
I appreciate it.
An honor and a pleasure.
Yeah, awesome. Likewise. All right. Well, we'll be in touch. I'll hopefully see you sometime in Chicago. I'll be coming down a little more often, I think.
Great. Love it.
Now that I'm up here in the UP. All right. See ya.
Bye.